Hey everyone, welcome back to Crypto Cash. Thank you very much for joining me here today. I hope you're having an amazing day. I know I am personally, but it's late in the day here for me in the States, so honestly, good morning to you if you just woke up somewhere else in the world. Either way, thank you. This is your one-stop shop for cryptocurrency analysis, all right? Now, we cover a lot of different things, of course, but typically we look at Bitcoin and Ethereum before we look at altcoins. Today, we're making an exception. We're just looking at Bitcoin itself. I'm doing this for my patrons, but also for my community too, just to give you kind of an understanding of what's going on. We're going to look at the 1 week chart and work our way down. Kind of get a full analysis here, just so you can walk away from this knowing something, learning something, and understanding more about the market because we had this recent crazy sell-off. We need to know how to react and respond to that, right? So that's what we're going to look at here today. So just before we get started, I do have a link to my Telegram community down below. Feel free to get engaged, learn as much as you can. There's no cost for that. I have a Patron or Patreon account, of course, so you can become a patron if you'd like. Of course, more importantly, though, I have a signal group included within that. And that signal group is fantastic because I send 3 to 5 signals per week. We've currently like a 92% success rate so far from, since its inception. So things are going very well with that. And thank you again to my patrons so far for contributing. You're all awesome. I love you very, very much. So without further ado, let's just go ahead and check out the charts. All right, folks, let's go ahead and take a look at Bitcoin here today. Now, if you're new to the channel, we typically look at Bitcoin anyways when we evaluate all currencies, especially altcoins, but in this case, I just felt inclined to go ahead and cover Bitcoin, mainly for my patrons, but also, of course, for my community, because I know it's kind of a common, normal thing to want to understand what's going on with this crazy sell-off here recently, okay? So we'll go ahead and take a look at that. And just to clarify, I use TradingView. This is a TradingView desktop application, tradingview.com. If you'd like to follow along in this scenario here, I use the 200-day simple moving average and the 50-day simple moving average. Now the yellow line here is the 50, purple is the 200, and I use those on the larger time frames because it makes more sense to use a simple moving average instead of an exponential, just based on the simple fact that simple moving averages work a little bit more effectively on larger time frames, whereas exponential is better for shorter time frames. Okay. Now everyone has a different school of thought there. It's not to say it's right or wrong. I've had more success personally with the simple moving averages on the 4-hour time frame or higher. So let's take a look at this here now. As far as the chart is concerned, first of all, we're using just the 1-day chart because we always like to look at the big picture and work our way down. In fact, why don't we just go ahead and take a look at the 1-week chart since we're only focusing on Bitcoin here today. And if we take a look, first of all, the 50-day moving average is actually, or it's basically 50-week moving average. That's essentially looking pretty good, honestly, right now. In other words, that's telling us the support level is right at about 31,500. So it almost tests that here today. So we shouldn't see it come much lower, of course. Again, this chart doesn't exactly tell us everything. It's not the end-all be-all. The numbers are a little skewed, of course, just based on the fact that it's taking every weeks on end to essentially evaluate these numbers here. So it's a little, I would say, delayed, for lack of better terms. We always like to use the 1-day chart more effectively than the 4-hour chart, but it is good to get perspective on the 50-day moving average and where that's at right now, based on the fact that it should be working as an average. So, I mean, hypothetically, Bitcoin goes sideways, it should continue to progress upwards because, the 50 is telling us that we are right at about 31,500. So to me, that's kind of somewhat of a support level outside of 30,000, of course, and 31,000 we've already tested previously. Okay, so just something to note there on the 1-week chart. Not much else we need to look at. 1-day chart is also very similar in a sense, whereas commonly the 1-day chart is going to be used by the industry leaders, so it's important to understand what they're looking at. And you can kind of see here, this is considered the death cross when the 50 intersected with the 200 in a downward fashion, and you saw the price action kind of retreat from there, continue to sell off, and really, honestly, there's no real need or reason for the price to have sold off. That was just kind of how it works in this case. It doesn't always work out that way, though. Keep that in mind. I've seen actually the inverse apply where it's a golden cross and the price goes down as well. So I don't put a lot of weight into that personally, so try not to buy into the hype if you hear that. But it does have some relevancy sometimes, so just be mindful. It may not be advantageous to have a position open until you understand what direction it's heading first. Either way, on the 1-day chart here, we'll also take a look, just to clarify, we have a 42,000 as a resistance level. We have the resistance at about 30, I think it's about 36.5, and of course the support at 30,000. So we basically got a support at 30,000, 31,000, 31.5 at this point in time. So should we see the price come much lower? Probably not, but again, depends on the FUD and what's going on, and all the uncertainty and doubt of what's the whole China thing there. It kind of didn't really help the numbers, obviously, and this seems to be happening over and over and over again. It's unfortunate. It's like a knee-jerk reaction. People just respond to it, and it doesn't need to happen, because honestly, Bitcoin will still thrive without China. Yes, it impacted things initially, but it shouldn't impact us much more moving forward. So I personally still feel like we're going to see a ramp back up, and then this is kind of a temporary lapse in our final bull run for the rest of the year. Again, that's just kind of the thought process there that I have. Not right, not wrong. It just is what it is. And in my experience over my tenure, I can tell you that these things happen a lot, unfortunately. But when it comes to China being a very large player in the game, so to speak, this is impacting it more than it really should. But things are getting figured out for Bitcoin. We'll pay attention to the news as it goes moving forward, but for now, this is what the one-day chart looks like. And let's go ahead and stick with the technicals. No more fundamentals here. Looking at the RSI, we're under 50. Okay. Now, as you can kind of see, the RSI, the 50, basically the line drawn right there in the center is 50 RSI. So the relative strength index basically telling us that that's working as a resistance level. So the 50 will oftentimes work as a resistance or a support, and it has been working as a resistance for some time now, right? Ever since the 18th of May, it's pretty much dropped down. Well, technically it was below that prior to. It was the April 17th that kind of caused us to come down, and it's pretty much ever since April 17th, the RSI on the one-day chart's been almost under 50, right? It came above with that last little ramp up, and everything's just been shutting down. So pay attention to the RSI coming up over 50. If it does, it's going to be fairly monumental and provide that support, so to speak, to keep the price a little bit higher. Moving on, taking a look at the MACD, we have a convergence now. It's kind of the price is coming down. This doesn't necessarily mean anything, but it is kind of an indication of a short signal for long-term swing traders, right? So just keep that in mind. I like the 4-hour chart better for the MACD personally, so I think that's more valid, more relevant. But on the one-day chart, it is something just to note and understand. Okay, so let's go ahead and take a look at the 4-hour chart now. And again, this is my more I'm a 4-hour chart kind of guy, right? Everyone has their own specific interest. 15 minutes and 4 hours, that's all I need, and I'm set. But when we look at the 4-hour chart, the reason why I like it is because the moving averages work the best. Okay, they appear to me to be the most accurate over the course of just pretty much all my trading. I've noticed the 4-hour charts have the most relevancy for support and resistance lines. In other words, the 50 here, you can see it worked as a resistance. You see how it broke through that resistance level right there, and it became a support, and then of course broke through again. You'll commonly see the 50-day moving average getting shot right straight through. It rarely will just kind of trickle through on the 4-hour chart. It'll essentially just make big jumps. So like for example, back here on what is that? That was the June 2nd, 2021. You worked as a resistance for about 16 hours, and then the 20th hour, it shot right straight through. Okay, so you can almost always see that happen. It rarely will just kind of ease on through. It either shoots up and shoots back down, or resists for a while and then blasts through. More common than not, right? And I'm mentioning that just because of it. The price does come back up. We're going to see it probably be tested on the 50-day moving average for a few hours. It's pretty common nowadays, I've noticed, for the price to not blast through or jump above initially. It typically takes a few hours to get there. Okay, so just expect it if it comes back up, or when it comes back up rather, to essentially test the 50-day moving average, and essentially, probably in most cases, I would say 8 to 16 hours is probably what we're expecting. Okay, so I wouldn't expect to see Bitcoin ramp back up anytime soon. It's still kind of in a consolidation phase right now. It looks like it's on a downward trend, but we'll see what happens when we look at the shorter time frames. MACD, as you can see, we got this convergence here that kind of drove the price down. And let's go ahead and mark that here. The convergence was approximately right at this point. Okay, I like to mark that just because sometimes that will coincide with the Ishimoku cloud on the 1-hour chart, and I think it's important to identify because those two usually work together. Convergence or a divergence essentially on the MACD will essentially reflect on the Ishimoku cloud on the 1-hour chart. We'll look at that here next. But for now, RSI is pretty low. We don't see a lot of craziness with the RSI, but good news is it's considered to be oversold, so there's a likelihood that we could see the price come back up based off that sentiment alone. But we want to look at the 1-hour chart and kind of identify a couple things first. That's kind of what we're looking at there for the 4-hour. And the 1-hour chart is, good for two things in my personal opinion, right? So it's good, obviously, to identify, the Ichimoku cloud. So let's take a look at that first. And what I mean by identify is just the fact that when the price is under the cloud, it's considered a sell signal, and when it's above the cloud, it's considered a buy signal. So had you bought in here, you might have had some terrible luck. Granted, it probably should have continued to go upwards here. However, the news kind of drove the price down, right? So generally speaking, it's still fairly accurate. But again, if it's above, it's considered a buy signal. If it's below, it's considered a sell signal. All right. So that being said, and I don't know if you saw this, of course, hope you were paying attention. The MACD on the 4-hour chart gave us the sell signal, right? It gave us that divergence that the price action came down. Look in here, you can see I marked it right there on the chart. And what is that? No less than 1 hour prior, the Ichimoku cloud signaled to us that this is a sell signal, okay? So always try to pay attention to that. This is the reason why we look at the 1-day chart and work our way down. Obviously, we looked at the 1-week chart here today, but generally speaking, you want to look at the 1-day chart, 4-hour, 1 hour, and 15-minute to get different perspectives, because every time frame has its own benefit. If you don't, if you use the same indicators on every time frame, that's not how it works. Okay, so watch some of my videos if you're not familiar with what I'm referring to. I try to be descriptive here in how the time frames work, but generally speaking, you don't need the moving averages on the 1 hour chart. You only need the Ichimoku cloud to kind of identify if it's a buy signal or sell signal. Keep in mind too, when the price is in the cloud, that's considered a no buy zone. Now, even though I know you want to get buy low and sell high, that's the general concept. You want to, more importantly, buy when you have confirmation, right? We'll look at the 15-minute chart here soon to see what that confirmation looks like. My confirmation that works fairly well, but the Ichimoku cloud concurrently is also a very good confirmation for us to understand if we're on the right side of the scale. Okay, I generally am apprehensive about entering in my position or taking a position unless the RSI is extremely low or I have other indicators present. Just when the price is under the cloud. Okay, so right now, generally looking at the cloud here for right now, it is not considered a buy signal. Yes, you could buy the dip essentially, but it could keep going lower, right? So just something to note. So that's kind of one thing. Second thing we always want to look at in the 1 hour chart is the TD sequential. This is Tom DeMark's sequential. This is something that's a little bit more advanced in the sense of the fact that there's a lot of moving parts, a lot of things you want to understand. But the general concept is that when you have a 9, basically what happens is these candles are closing. Each time this candle closes, it looks at the candle 4 candlesticks away, basically 4 hours prior, and anytime it marks a number and adds to a number, it's essentially higher in that case. In other words, this one is higher than this one's higher than this one, so on and so forth. You don't necessarily have to understand that specifically. The main concept, though, is when you see a 9, it basically tells you that there is exhaustion, right? Because oftentimes when you continue in a certain direction, the market can only go so far in that direction until there's a retracement, okay? So in this case here, if we see, it shows that there was a 1, there was a sell-off, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and now we just broke that with a 1. So essentially, that basically tells us that there's a possibility of the price continuing upwards and that potential reversal was broken. Okay. Again, you don't want to only make decisions on TD sequential. You don't want to make only decisions on Ichimoku cloud. You take all these together and add them up, and you make a decision based on all the details that you can understand, right? So just again, take all this with a grain of salt. Not each one is perfect. They all work together, so to speak, to make an informed decision. So moving on to the 15. What we use on the 15-minute chart here, if you're unfamiliar, first of all, is not the Ichimoku cloud. I think it's really truly only effective on the 1 hour chart, maybe the 4 hour, but mostly just the 1 hour. That's my personal opinion. When it comes to, however, the 15-minute chart, which has ultimately become my favorite over the years, just based on the fact that I'm able to get the confirmation that I'm looking for, the confirmation I feel is necessary to take entry. Okay, so whether or not you're a swing trader, day trader, whatever, this works fairly well most of the time. So what I do is I basically enable my EMA View App notification. Now this is a notification that's really kind of one that was built by me. I provide this to my patrons, but what I'm getting at is that it really is just a combination of an EMA 15 and the volume weighted average price. So if you're new to the channel or just in general, you don't know what the View App is, I'd like to explain this briefly. It takes the volume the last 24 hours and expresses it as a price. However, it must reset every 24 hours to reset the standard deviation. So when we look here, basically it's always the same time, right at about 1700 or 5 p.m. Pacific, it always resets. So you see the line, kind of in the center, and then it just kind of catches up. What it does in that 24-hour period is tells us what the average volume is expressed as a price. Okay, so obviously Bitcoin's been going sideways here, so up until just recently, the price action was generally right around 32,800. But right now, since it had reset, price is above VWAP, whereas it's 32,500. So in other words, 32,500. So that's basically just telling us that it's considered to be a support level. And when the VWAP is below, it's a support. When it's above, it's a resistance. So in this scenario here, when we're looking at the VWAP, currently these little yellow indications here are telling us that we have confirmation. Now I'll explain what I mean by that in a minute, but when it comes to the EMA lines, if you're not familiar with that, I use the EMA 15. So this red line here is the EMA, and what that is, that's the exponential moving average. Okay, a lot of default functions on these type of exchanges will give you a default of 9 and 20. So you'll have two moving averages kind of going with the price. That's all well and good. That's not bad. I prefer the 15 though. It kind of blends the average, so to speak, so it's less noisy, because I feel that you shouldn't have too many indicators on your chart at one time, because you don't want to have conflicting information. You want to have 2 or 3 indicators on a chart per time frame and make sure that they're the best darn indicators you want to use, right? Which is why I like to go through the time frames, because each one serves a purpose. The EMA is fantastic on the 15-minute chart or lower, which is why I don't use it on larger time frames. But regardless of that fact, what it does is it tells us if its price is either bullish or bearish. It's very similar to the MACD, where we have this convergence and divergence lines intersecting. This is just the 12 and the 26, and gives us buy signals and sell signals. Well, the 15 here gives us buy signals and sell signals because it confirms that the price is either moving with the trend or against the trend. Okay, so just looking back here, for example, this is an indication here. So my indication tells me, so I'd set a reminder and it would notify me as soon as I get one of these candles to close. In other words, my indication of confirmation is 2 solid green bars closing above EMA and VWAP. And what that's doing is telling you the price is above support. It's telling you the price is above, or in other words, moving with the current, right? So the bulls are in control right here, as you can kind of see. Well, had you take an entry right here, hypothetically, it would signal you here, and you would take entry, and you'd come up, and you'd consider either selling your position somewhere here or holding on. But regardless, that basically just tells you the price is moving in the direction you want to head, right? So that's just kind of one function of that. If you're shorting, the inverse would apply. Price is below here, price is below EMA. You see how it comes down, comes up, tries to test, gets rejected, and keeps coming down. That's essentially how the EMA works. All right, so that being said, at this point in time, the EMA is below the price. The VWAP is below the price. Ergo, we have support, confirmation, and generally speaking, at this point in time, we have 45 minutes, well, almost 45 minutes worth of confirmation telling us the bulls are in control, it's moving the direction we want to head. So this is what I try to teach to all of my patrons, all of my community members, and this is what I utilize in my signal group as well, where I send 3 to 5 signals per week based on this criteria and obviously everything else we've just looked at. So looking at that, I mean, hypothetically at this point, based on these metrics alone and the fact that on the 4-hour chart, the RSI is fairly low, and we saw a divergence recently, there's a great chance that the price action will continue to increase pending no further news for Bitcoin, right? So if we get no more, unfortunate news for Bitcoin, we should be able to see this continue on. Same thing should apply with other altcoins as well, obviously depending on the altcoin. Okay? So again, just pay attention to that, be mindful of that. I don't really care about looking at the 1-minute chart in this scenario because this is all the confirmation that I need personally. But if you're the kind of person to look at the 1-minute chart, use the same philosophy, right? Look for 3 or 4 solid green bars above EMA and VWAP, and that would maybe be a consideration for a good entry point, right? But because the bottom line here is you see the price coming up, coming down, bouncing off of EMA, and it continues up. If it continues up to come up and bounces off EMA again, that's considered a bull run. You want to get in as soon as possible when those things happen. So honestly, right now at this point in time, I think Bitcoin is considered a buy. Again, we don't know what's going to happen with the news. If the news comes out and it's terrible and some other country decides not to utilize Bitcoin, we're going to see that tank, and we're going to see it go down to test 30,000. But for now, based on the criteria that I see here, we're going sideways. We have some good indications of a buy signal. We don't have a full confirmation yet, and the reason why I say that is just because it hasn't really broken free. We don't have higher highs and higher lows yet. So that's the only thing else I'd want to wait for before taking entry here. because if you don't have higher highs and higher lows, then this could just be a simple, retracement. In fact, keep this in mind too. According to the 15-minute chart, we do have lower highs and lower lows. So that is technically kind of working against us here, right? Even though this indication is telling it's a buy signal, if it doesn't continue to progress upwards here and break, just say 20, we'll say a round number, 33,000. If we don't get to break 33,000, then there's a good chance it's going to come back down and make lower lows. Again, it could, right? We never truly know, but these are all little things you want to try to swing in your favor and understand as you move forward. So I hope you found benefit from this. I would love to know if you did not have further questions, or this created more questions than answers, right? But I like to generally educate in my videos and make sure you understand specifically how to be a better trader. Teach you to trade for a lifetime, not just for one day, right? And if you want better signals, more opportunities, because you don't have time to look at this where I do, because I freaking just love analyzing charts all day long, then go ahead, reference my Patreon community and see if you'd like to consider a signal group where I send 3 to 5 signals per week. We're currently at about a 92% success rate. Obviously, it's not going to continue that on, that far. Overall, my success rate in general is usually 80 to 90%, but we've had a pretty good run recently. But with these types of scenarios, it can be hard to gauge just based on the fact that there's a lot of fear, uncertainty, and doubt, and those things can sway the favor in the wrong direction. You truly don't know what's going to happen. But if the worst is behind us now, I'd say that Bitcoin is a pretty affordable and pretty good price, and I'm going to consider taking entry here very soon, and I'm going to send a signal to my group likely in the near future. So thank you again for your patience and watching this far if you have. Hope you have a good rest of your day, and we'll see you in the next video. Take care.